Hey everyone, it's Kristen. So with Valentine's Day coming up, I thought we'd do something a little different. So this was published in 2018. It's a very DC Valentine's Day. It just contains different kind of original stories about DC characters, centered around Valentine's Day. And yes, I'm wearing a Scarlet Witch shirt, even though I'm talking about DC, because surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, this is my only pink shirt, pink superhero shirt, and I thought, pink goes best with Valentine's Day. So I'm not going to do every story in here because there's actually a couple of characters in here that I don't know anything about. I know you're probably thinking, what? There's something you don't know about? There's something comic book related that you don't know? Oh, there's plenty I don't know. So I'm not going to talk about those because I really honestly don't know anything about those characters. So I'm just gonna skip over those. So I think we're gonna start like where they start with like the monsters. Let's see. Well, I mean, I'm doing them a little bit out of order because I'm trying to group them into groups to make it, easier. Like if you don't want to watch, like for example, this is mostly going to be about monsters. If you don't want to watch this one, then you can skip it and go to a different one. So we start with Frankenstein, and she's called the Bride, but she's the bride of Frankenstein, and they're actually at the ant farm, which is the base of operations for Superhuman Advanced Defense Executive SHADE, which is pretty much a ripoff of SHIELD. Well, I mean, Marvel and DC and other comic book properties have been, borrowing from each other and copying each other for like years and years. So it's not really much of a surprise. But I mean, SHIELD has been around since, I want to say the 1960s, I'm pretty sure. And this was just done in 2011. So pretty new, pretty recent that they just decided, hey, let's go ahead and let's go ahead and do that. So it's interesting because even though Frankenstein, created originally by Mary Shelley in like 1845, I think, maybe. I could be wrong about that. I don't quite remember. But he is a DC property. Like the DC can use him in their comic books, but Marvel and other places can't. So I think that's interesting. So if because he is actually called Frankenstein in DC Comics, and in other comics, I don't think they're allowed to call him that, or if they do, they're not really supposed to. So I'm pretty sure that DC has like the intellectual property rights to doing a comic book version of him. I could be wrong. I could have remembered that wrong, but I'm pretty sure. Anyway, so it's interesting because Frankenstein and the Bride, both work at SHADE. And it seems like from this first interaction, it seems like they're estranged. Like there's something like going on that's not right with them. And you notice how the Bride, Frankenstein's bride, has two sets of arms, which I found interesting that they decided to go in that direction. But I guess to make her like more distinguishable from Frankenstein, so she's not exactly, kind of like the female version of him. So she says, when we last spoke, you said you had something for me, and he calls her lady, because of course, they were born like 200 years ago, so it's more of that old English kind of style of speech. And he's like, yes, I do have something for you. And before he can give it to her, Father Time, this little girl right here, says, I have a mission for you. You need to go to the Powers International Home Electronics office in San Jose. They make, robotics, and apparently their robots are possessed by Satan, which you're like, okay, that's very random. But this, is pretty much like, well, SHIELD has the Howling Commandos, which originally were, just Nick Fury and his squad, and that was like 1964. And but of course, more recently, I think like, wow, now I drew a blank. But I think more in the 2000s, the Howling Commandos, like Nick Fury's Howling Commandos, came about, where it's monsters, like a supernatural unit of SHIELD that came about. So this is kind of basically what this is. So we see on the next page, it says, to my bride. And so basically it's a letter that Frankenstein is writing her. And so we see this letter interspersed between them fighting. Like the text of it is over what they're doing, what they're fighting. So anyway, it, kind of says, this letter's long overdue. It was first thought of, conceived when we were first introduced by our maker in Geneva, some over 200 years ago. It's, our lives are so chaotic, full of horror and adventure, and he's been meaning to write this, but yeah, it's been like 200 years. And he says, given all that time to prepare, one would think that this would be easy for me. And he says, no, I fear it more than an enraged green Martian, which trying to tie the DC universe into this universe. So he's like, so excuse this shake of my dead hand, as it smudges, the words that I'm trying to say. It's funny because, okay, not funny, but, it is, these little robots, Roombas, are saying basically, we'll find the sins you hide in the corner. We'll suck up your soul, these little Roombas, which, seeing, I mean, can you imagine if your Roomba turned on you? That'd be pretty sad. Like my cat Dazzler, she's still scared of the Roomba. She does not like the Roomba. So if I turn it on, she'll go run and hide. So he goes on to say in the letter, I love you with all that I am, every piece of me. Like perhaps the only thing that all my pieces have in common is that they love you, because of course he's made out of all these different pieces. Like he mentions in the letter, one hand has belonged to a sinner, one a saint, but they all remember their favorite things, like the hilt of a sword, or the kickback of a gun, or the touch of your cheek. And it was her nation that inspired him to get out of his self-imposed loneliness. And then you see these, I call them Rosies, because it's a robot vacuum that dressed as a maid. Rosie, as in the Jetsons maid. That's actually what I call my Roomba too, is Rosie, after the Jetsons robot maid. I mean, I think it makes sense to give it a name. I'll be like, oh, when she gets stuck, I'm like, oh no, Rosie, what's wrong? Did you get stuck? Are you stuck underneath the entertainment center? Anyway, moving on. So, he also says, like, as they're battling, the Rosie say, how may we serve you, to Satan? He says, you allowed me to, in my infant form, to feel compassion, to contemplate a future, things that I wouldn't have thought of before. And he, this line, which I thought was kind of a cool imagery, says, my flesh is map-lined with roads and rivers of stitches trapped between states of vital life and decay. It longs for your touch. I mean, so it's a pretty poetic letter, and interspersed, on the background of this, violent fight that they're having. And then there's basically the control center, who has totally been corrupted. And they try to reason with it, which, of course, you can't reason with it. But the control center says you're the abomination, soulless things bereft of God's touch, because of course they were created. Yeah. So a lot of people, I guess, if you were created in that way, you wouldn't necessarily think you had a soul. But yeah, they try to reason with it, and of course there's no reasoning with it. And then he's saying, like, my mouth, encased in black lips, longs to say these things, but just finds it so hard to do so. And so he's, his mouth has often been the enemy, ahead of his brain or behind his hand. Like he can't think of the words to say. But he said, it's not my greatest foe. My greatest foe is my heart, because it's usually off rhythm. It's too slow, or it's too fast, meaning they never match up. And you can see, obviously, that the bride, she's like, oh, my beloved Cynthia, how I missed you. Because you see on the last panel that there's a voice saying, lady. That's what they call each other. And so he basically, the last line he says, I'm always seems to be out of sync with the one I love. And he basically ends up just ripping up the letter. So I thought that was kind of a sweet story, like the Frankenstein and his bride, and their a sweet but weird story. Interspersed over the action of them defeating possessed robots by Satan. He's trying, talking about this sweet, really sweet love letter. So, okay, the next one that we're going to talk about, like I said, sorry, excuse me as I skip through, is actually going to be Swamp Thing. I don't know how much you know about Swamp Thing. So I don't know how much you know about Swamp Thing, but okay, one thing I found really interesting is that, of course, Swamp Thing and Man-Thing are very similar. And I kind of thought Swamp Thing came out before Man-Thing. Man-Thing is the Marvel property. But actually, ironically, I think it was, let's see. I think it was that Man-Thing actually came out in May of 1971, and Swamp Thing came out in July of that same year. So really close. Man-Thing, they slipped it out right before Swamp Thing. I don't know if that's just because, like, they just happened to get it out first, and they kind of had the same idea was circulating, and Marvel just happened to get it out first. But interesting, very close together. So I thought this was also, a sweet story. Swamp Thing was super popular, like in the 80s. Like I think 1982 had a movie. I think Heather Locklear was in it, if I'm not mistaken. I saw it once a long time ago. It's interesting. That's all I can say about it. They had a sequel in 1989, I believe, and then they had a TV show, and then they actually had a more recent TV show, 2019, which honestly I didn't even know about that TV show. I don't even know if, like, what streaming service it's on or anything. So I might have to look into that, because Swamp Thing is actually a really interesting character. He was like a young scientist in Louisiana. Well, actually, there's been like 6 Swamp Things, so their kind of origins are a little bit muddled. But this mentions Louisiana as the place where it takes place. So I'm thinking it's the one who was like a young scientist, and got his colleague was jealous of the girl that he had. And so he killed him, and, all these chemicals, all the toxins, and he would left his body in the swamp. And so then he, became Swamp Thing. So anyway, we open where he's talking to one of his friends, and he says, "Did you get it?" And he's like, "Yeah, I got it," and it's a Valentine. And it's because Swamp Thing has met a girl he wants to give this Valentine to. And the Valentine says, "Girl, I've been chicking you out." And there's a picture of a chicken. And he's like, "I can't give her this." And he's like, "Well, what do you want from me? There was, not that many Valentines in the store." And he's like, "Well, get a different one." And he's like, "Okay, fine." And, he gives him this heart one. And basically what happened is he fell in love with Terry. She's a botanist, and she was, in the swamp doing research, and she saw him naked, and she was so embarrassed, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know anyone was here." And he's like, "That's okay, I'm usually naked anyway." And she's like, "What are you?" And he said, it's complicated. And kind of to himself, his own narrative as he's retelling this story, he's like, "I've been called, a superhero. I've been called a monster. I'm, a creature. But pretty much it doesn't matter what I've called, because it's all the same. Like, I see the fear in these people's eyes. Like, when I look into the eyes of everyone, all I can see is their fear reflected back." But Terry's not like that. When she looks at me, she doesn't show fear. And she basically, being a botanist, like, taught him all, about himself, like how Spanish moss was so versatile, and it was used in clothing, and like seat covers for cars, and used for insulation. And he's like, "I never knew, myself to be beautiful, but she showed me that I was." And he's like, "Will you join me for dinner?" And he took her to this spot and introduced her to his friends, which are alligators. And she's like, "Do you bring all the girls here?" And he's like, "No, just one, Abby." And she's like, "Oh, well, what happened to her?" And he's like, "Well, she was my wife, and they took her from me." And she's like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I didn't know." And he's like, "It's okay. I mostly keep to myself now." So this corporation, Argo, they caught sight of a Swamp Thing sighting, and this they want to bring him in because they want to study him, and probably use him to make money or weapons, because that's usually the two things that corporations like that want, is either to use it as a weapon or to somehow make money off of it, So anyway, they decide, instead of sending a team of their own people, they're going to send a team of, or they're going to outsource it to a local family that, basically is a kidnapper for hire. So they call them and set that up. And so, basically, he gives her the Valentine. Swamp Thing gives Terry the Valentine. And, he also gives her ghost orchids, which, honestly, I don't know if that's a real thing. I forgot to look that up. So if you know if it's a real thing, just, comment below. Let me know if it is. And Terry says, I used to have one. He said, "I think I still have one." And she's like, "Oh yeah? I mean, what is your heart shaped like now?" And he's like, "A box." She's like, "A box?" And he says, I'm going to read it so I don't misquote it, because I thought this was really sweet. He says, "When I'm in love, my heart feels like a fortress, like it'll keep me safe from whatever the world sends against me. Without love, my heart becomes a prison without a key." And she says, "Oh, you may not be a man, but you're the sweetest man, like, I've ever known." And he's like, at that moment, he felt like, nothing could go wrong. And unfortunately, the team, the family that they hired to kidnap him, moves in. They snare Terry in a net. They try to harm him with swords, bullets, none of that works against him. I mean, he's a plant, vegetation basically. So unfortunately, like Terry says, Alec weakly, very, because apparently she's been caught in the crossfire and killed. So what he decides, because he can see, he basically, in his narrative, he's like, it was foolish of me to think that like I could have happiness, that this wouldn't happen again. He had forgotten most about what he is. He, guy's eyes, especially after they stabbed him, and nothing happened. So he's like, I should kill them. Like, they deserve to die, but that's a human concept, and he's no longer human. So what he's going to do is, since death is too good for them, it's quick, there's no pain in death. It's just over, and what he does is basically traps them in this swamp. Like, the vegetation grows higher, like thicker, they can't get out, and it gives them a little bit of water and a little bit of food, just enough to survive. And basically they're going to wander around there the rest of their lives. And he says goodbye to Terry because he has to leave the swamp, because now that this one team has come after him, I mean, it's only a matter of time before more people come after him. Okay, so the next one we're going to look at is, hold on, let me find it. Okay, sorry, it took me a minute to find it. Okay, so this is a story about the Creature Commandos, which Frankenstein is a part of sometimes, as we were talking about in the first video. And so the Creature Commandos have actually been around since 1980. There's like I think it was like Weird World War Tales, because they're a unit that was formed during World War II. And of course the Howling Commandos, Sergeant Fury and the Howling Commandos, like 1964. But the updated version, like Nick Fury and the Howling Commandos, which were like the supernatural unit of S.H.I.E.L.D., wasn't until like I think 2005. I said early 2000s, but I think 2005. So basically they are on a mission. You have, and it's called Dear Belcoro, and you have Lucky, who actually, it looks like Frankenstein, but that's not Frankenstein. It's a guy who stepped on a mine and got stitched back together and kind of looks like Frankenstein. He has no vocal cords or anything though, so he just kind of grunts a lot. You have Myrna, I think her name is. She's a Gorgon, basically the race that Medusa was. And you have a werewolf and a vampire. So their mission, and this, like, Lieutenant Matthew Shreve, he is in charge of this unit, and he is the one that reports, back to Central Intelligence and tells them, how the missions go, and he's the one that gets mission specs and gets what their mission is supposed to be. So anyway, basically the Nazis have developed these steel stormtroopers, these robots that they want to implant human brains into. So their mission is to go to all the bases and destroy them. So they went to the first two bases, first base, destroyed all the robots. They hadn't been implemented with human brains yet. There were no U.S., no U.S. soldier casualties. So, it went really well. So here you can see a better picture of them. So they basically have downtime before their next mission. This was in the Valentine's Day issue. It's a little bit different of a story, and you'll see why. So Matthew Shreve talks about how, we all have downtime, and he likes to have, drink bourbon with murder mysteries, and he doesn't know what the rest of the team does. But, the fact that he's hanging out with monsters so much makes him worry that he's becoming a monster. So we have Warren, the werewolf. He's, running into the woods and stops, and he, sees something. It's Velcoro, the vampire. And so they're just kind of, talking, and he's like, hey, Vincent Velcoro, the vampire, what are you doing out here? Like, it's in the middle of the woods, and you're just all out here all alone. And he's like, yeah, just thinking, basically. And he's like, well, we did. And Warren, the werewolf, hey, I just realized Vincent the vampire, Warren the werewolf, Marina she's a Gorgon, but Medusa's the most famous Gorgon. Anyway, so Warren's like, I just meant that it was a good day today. We killed a lot of Nazis, we trashed the robots, just lighten up. And he's like, that mission got my blood, boiling, so I feel like I need to go kill a bear or a deer. Do you want to join me? And Vincent's like, even on a good day, I'm not going to do that. I wouldn't do that. It's like, well, do you want to be alone? What's going on? And he's like, finally, he tells him, well, my girl back home sent me a Dear John letter. She said that she didn't love me anymore, and that the letters that I've sent her since I've been gone have just been different. Like, I don't even sound like myself anymore. And he's like, Warren's like, well, I mean, you aren't. You're a vampire. And he's like, thanks. And he's like, Warren's like, for setting you straight, like, you're a vampire. And he's like, no, not making that, have you looked in the mirror lately joke. And Warren's like, oh, well, you don't call me Fido, so it goes both ways. And he's like, Vincent's like, I mean, I've had some crazy notions, like just going home, turning her into a vampire, like ripping the head off of the guy that she's currently seeing. But, those are some of the thoughts that I've passed through my head. And he's like, but honestly, she's right. I mean, and you're right. Like, I am a vampire now. I have changed. So, and he jokes and says, like, secondly, I don't think a bat can fly all the way across the Atlantic. So, I mean, this kind of brings up a question, like, okay, so you're in love with someone, before, and then you turn into a vampire. Like, what would you do? Would you go to them and be like, hey, I'm a vampire now. I want to still be with you. I still want to be together. Do you want to be with me? Or would you just like be like, hey, and then turn them and be like, now we can be together? Like, I mean, obviously, like, or would you just not say anything and just, like him, let it go? I'd probably let it go. I mean, that's a huge change to make, like a huge change to adjust to. I don't know. To me personally, it feels like that wouldn't be fair to ask that of someone. But I guess and also in perspective though, if you don't ask, is that fair that you don't ask them? But I mean, pretty much she's already said it's over. So I mean, I guess that kind of, makes this question null and void. But I'm saying, like, if she didn't say that, like, what would you do? I mean, like I said, I think I would, kind of let them down gently, because I don't think it'd be fair to burden them with that part, like, of my life if I did turn into a vampire, because that's a totally different thing. Like, okay, I don't know if you guys remember that movie District 9, and that guy turns into an alien, and the guy I was dating at the time asked me, would you still love me if I turned into an alien like that? I'm like, I froze because I'm like thinking, no, no. Which, I mean, that's just, yeah, I was honest with myself, but I didn't know what to say to him. Because of course that scenario would never happen. But at the same time, you're like, I don't, you don't know what to tell him because you want to be like, oh, of course I'd still love you, but, yeah. Anyway, he makes the joke, he's like, at least I had love, it was glorious. She was glorious. Like the way she would be backlit by the sun, as it was setting or as it was rising. And, Warren jokes like, hey, well now if you are backlit by the sun, it would be glorious in a totally different way, haha. And he said, Vincent asked, have you ever been in love? And Warren said, well, I was weird before this happened. Like I thought I was a werewolf before I even became a werewolf. So my love life was pretty scarce, pretty sparse. There was this one girl, Irene, he says, that he liked. She had really dark, thick hair, and sometimes she had a little bit of a mustache. And he's like, I was really attracted to facial hair, apparently. And he's like, what about you? And Vincent, like, I'm attracted to, long necks, making jokes, I guess. Anyway, so they get a call in that they've located the second base. So they go back, and Vincent just says, like, hey, before, and here's Matthew, the lieutenant, and Vincent just says to the guys, like, hey, before we go and, take out this other base, I just want to tell you that I love you guys. I appreciate you guys here. And I mean, the fact that we can all be lonely together, makes a huge difference. Like, I love you guys. And Matthew was like, what the? You guys are supposed to be monsters. What's with this sappy crap? We're supposed to be on a mission. Do you? And then basically they go, brains the steel soldiers and the robots. So unfortunately they have to, even though like it's a human brain, they still have to like destroy all the robots because like how are you supposed to save that? So here's like a picture of them, destroying all the robots, and Matthew just says, mission accomplished. We retrieved the data. No U.S. casualties. Anyway, so that's a different kind of love story. So I think, like I said, that's all like the monster stories in here. So I think I'll end it there. This is run a little longer than my normal ones, but this way, like you can skip this one. Well, if you skip this one, obviously you're not hearing me talk. But anyway, so so that people can skip this one if they want, and go on to the next ones. So anyway, I think the next one is going to be like all like Batman stories. So if you want to join me for that, like I hope you will. Until next time, bye.